Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vishadvahai Om Shanti 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 Om Peace Peace Peace. Om Bolo Satguru Sivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Bolo Swami Vishnudevananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
How are you?
Very good, thank you. So wonderful to see you all here tonight. Maybe we can have a little more light. Thank you. Let there be light. So wonderful to see you all here on a Wednesday night. A few of our staff from the ashram in upstate, we traveled down tonight to join you here for the satsang. And now in the ashram we're having a wonderful program with Molly, Berkel and Madhavi, a special program, a yoga retreat for veterans. So a nice, very beautiful group of veterans at the ashram for the week who are studying yoga and practicing yoga. And it's quite inspiring to see how it's become so common to use yoga and meditation and yoga philosophy as a means to help deal with all different aspects of society that have different issues and struggles, but to recognize the power of yoga to help humanity, never regardless to the part of society and regardless to the struggle. Yoga is being used as a great way to overcome whatever issues are there. So it's really beautiful to have them with us for the week at the ashram. So tonight we're continuing with our subject for the month, with his teachings from this one of the main books of Swami Sivananda, Mind, Its Mysteries and Control. Have you figured out already the mysteries of the mind? You've been able to control it yet? It's a difficult thing. So, tonight we'll share some teachings on the subject of the practice of Vairagya. What is Vairagya?
Self-control.
Vairagya means the non-attachment or dispassion. Okay? So, once when I first became a staff here at the center, many years ago, about 60 years ago or so, I first came, and the Swamiji here at the time, he told me, whenever you don't know what to talk about at satsang, always talk about love. That everybody will enjoy. But he said, be very careful about talking about non-attachment. Nobody likes that subject. But I think you'll be able to digest it tonight. Non-attachment is definitely not a popular subject. We generally don't enjoy hearing about the idea of developing non-attachment. Why do you think that is the case? Why does the mind have this type of a react to the concept of non-attachment? Because we're attached. Because the idea of letting go is not something that is really appealing to the mind. We associate it with struggle, we associate it with suffering, the idea of letting go of our attachments. But in yoga, we learn that we have to re-educate ourselves about this concept of non-attachment. A lot of misunderstanding about it. Many times people are not attracted to practice it or afraid to practice it because there is a notion that one will become more cold or one will become more, how do you say, apathic?
Apathetic.
Apathetic. And one will become less caring, less connected, more within themselves and less connected with others. But this is a false understanding of what actually non-attachment will lead to. Real non-attachment. Real non-attachment will make you the most loving person, will make you the most generous person, the most giving person, the most connected person. Because actually that which stands between us and love is what? Attachment. It is the selfish attachments that create struggle in the relationship. It is the selfish attachments that don't enable us to give, that restrict our heart. The more that we develop real non-attachment, the more that we'll become embodiments of love and joy. And in yoga we learn that non-attachment is really the main thing. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna explained that it is through the practice of non-attachment that we attain mastery over the mind. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali explains that it's through non-attachment that we go from one state of meditation into a higher state, and we keep evolving in our states of consciousness as we grow in the degree of non-attachment. Non-attachment is really the main thing. But we have to learn to develop a healthy relationship with non-attachment. We have to learn to understand it properly and know how to practice it. So tonight we would want to share a little bit about how we start developing this practice of non-attachment and how does it work. So Swami Sivananda talks about this in the book. Actually, this is such an important subject. Swami Sivananda has a whole book called How to Cultivate Vairagya. So one book just on the development of non-attachment, and you can download it for free from the Divine Life Society website. And you can download it, you can give it to your friends. They will not remain your friends afterwards. But maybe they will catch to it. So these are a few words of Swami Sivananda first about the development of Vairagya. Those who practice Vairagya are real tamers of their minds, have no longing for objects, avoid them. Vairagya thins out the mind. Vairagya is a drastic prerogative for the mind. The thief mind shudders and trembles when it hears the words Vairagya, Tyaga, which means renunciation, and sannyasa. Sannyasa, like becoming a Swami or renouncing. It gets a death blow when it hears these terms. So the mind is highly afraid of these concepts of renunciation, of non-attachment. Why? Because it's the end of the mind. The mind is basically the expression of attachments. What we think upon, where our mind wanders to, it's all expressions of our attachments. If we root attachments out, the mind comes to an end. Basically, the spiritual path comes to an end. We complete our spiritual journey through the development of non-attachment. So, how do we develop non-attachment? For this, we'll use the board to show you step by step the practices.
Do you want to write it or you write?
Either you or Sundar else.
Sundar, you write.
So, these are the different steps of how do we develop non-attachment. So the yogis and all the scriptures, they talk non-attachment is key. The more that we develop non-attachment, the more we are capable of meditation. You can see this. When we meditate, when we try to focus on the mantra, when we try to focus on the breath, and the mind ever keeps wandering, what is the cause for that? The attachments. Basically, the mind goes to wherever it is attached to. The mind likes certain things, so that's where the mind goes to. The mind is worried about certain things, anxious about certain things. Why? Because it's afraid that it's going to lose its attachments. So the mind, ever in its negative, or either in its pain or pleasure that the mind moves from here and there, it's always attachments that make the mind move in one direction or the other. This is why it is very important and very beneficial to practice meditation even though we don't feel that we are one-pointed. Many times people say, oh, I don't know about this meditation. I'm never really steady. My mind is always wandering. I don't know if there's any value to me. So what Swami Sivananda says, yes, there's great value. Learn to see where the mind is going. Learn to analyze why the mind is wandering to these places. Recognize where the mind is regularly going. And you will see, every time when you sit to meditation, there is the same type of places that the mind keeps going. So recognize where the mind wanders to, and then analyze why the mind is going there. Meaning, learn to recognize the attachment that underlines the movement of the mind in that direction. And recognizing our attachment is the first and foremost step for learning to become non-attached. We have to recognize the mental conditioning. It's just like working with any type of addiction. See, the attachments are like forms of addictions. It's habits that we are used to going in a certain places over and over again. And the first step to overcome any addiction is what?
Awareness.
The awareness, the acknowledgement of the addiction. So when we meditate, it's not bringing the mind to the one-pointedness. That is the ultimate goal. But in the process, the only way we're going to be able to do it is by learning to see the mind where it is now. To learn to understand the conditioning of the mind. Basically learning to recognize our attachments. And then when we recognize them, the next step is to learn how to deal with them. And only when we learn how to deal with our attachments, we can ultimately become free from them and be able to meditate. We can never really meditate before that. Otherwise, it's always the mind is going to be drawn towards the attachments. To repeat Om Namah Shivaya will be boring for the mind. Who wants to repeat that? Let me go think about the ice cream. Let me go think about the pizza after the satsang. All these different things, this is much more interesting for the mind. And only when we recognize those tendencies and learn how to deal with them, then we can have a peaceful mind that is capable of meditation. So what is the different step? No, that's not the first step. How to develop the non-attachment of Vairagya. First thing that we do in the practice is and this is some practices that we do that Swami Sivananda recommends. First we make a list of all our attachments. Well, not all of them. That will be a very long Encyclopedia Britannica. But we make even a nice paper list of our attachments. A very nice exercise to do. To think, okay, what am I attached to? And you don't have to post it on Facebook. You just keep it for yourself, for your own self-reflection and awareness. And basically, how do we know that we are attached to something?
We fear losing it.
We fear losing it. Exactly. There is if it changes, it will impact us. You see, it's like if you walk outside and you see a Subaru that was scratched completely. Somebody came and made a big dent in it or so. If it's not yours, you don't care about it. But if you see it's your car, it will be a big impact to the mind. So why? Because that car we're not attached to, but this car we are attached to. So whatever we are attached to, if something happens to it, it will affect our mind. So that's how we can sense if we are attached to, meaning our peace of mind or well-being, or we have some dependency on it. And this is it's very important not to be at all judgmental when we do this type of exercise, just to become aware. Where are there some dependencies within us? So first we make a list. That's the first step, making a list. Then, the second step to start practicing and developing non-attachment is to choose one attachment to work on, to start developing this non-attachment. And usually it's very good to choose some food, because that's relatively easy, and it's a nice, so you attach to chocolate, tiramisu, pizza, macchiato, these things. And whatever, to choose one attachment, food is a nice one to exercise with. But of course, what you will see, that it doesn't matter, when you start developing to non-attachment to one object, you become much more skilled in learning to have non-attachment to all objects. But food is a good one to start with. So you choose one of the objects. Now, for those of you who have done TTC, you might remember that Vairagya, non-attachment, is not so much of a practice, but it's an actual result of a prior practice. There is a practice that we do, that once we become successful in it, non-attachment naturally takes place. Do you remember what that is? What is the practice that is a preliminary to non-attachment? Viveka. Very good. Viveka, which means discrimination. Meaning learning to use our intellect to analyze things. So through the proper practice of discrimination, naturally non-attachment comes out of that. Now, discrimination is usually taught as learning to see the difference between the real and the unreal, the self and the non-self, and the permanent and the impermanent. In this case of the developing Vairagya, in this exercise, the type of discrimination that we are practicing is learning to see the defects in the objects. That is the practice. So, what do? We choose one attachment to work on. The third practice is called contemplation on the defects of the object of attachment. So meaning, let's say we choose the chocolate. So every morning, so here, for this practice to work, there needs to be some discipline and some regularity of practice. So you choose the object of the attachment, and every morning, to start with, 10 minutes or so, you contemplate the defects of the object of attachment. So we say the chocolate, so you start contemplating. Oh, chocolate is not good for me. Chocolates will make my teeth yellow. It is very expensive. These are, you can start with that. These are minor defects. But then, what is the ultimate defect of any object within this world?
Impermanence.
Impermanence. It is changing. Meaning, if you will be attached to it, you are bound to experience suffering. You're bound to experience grief, restlessness. You're going to be worried about it not being there anymore, and eventually it's not going to be there, it's going to change. So every object ultimately cannot give us real happiness because of its nature of impermanent, of being impermanent. So we contemplate and we see that the object cannot give us really what we're looking for. Now, why this is so important? Because attachment arises out of the false notion of that thing giving us happiness. We are not aware of that. We don't recognize how this starts. But any attachment is based on this false notion that that thing contains happiness. And in reality, no object on its own contains happiness. For something to contain happiness, it has to give happiness all the time, unconditionally. And if you take, we say, a chocolate cake gives happiness after one chocolate cake. Second chocolate cake, maybe still a good happiness. Third chocolate cake, happiness. Fourth chocolate cake gives us nausea. Same chocolate cake, same object, sometimes gives happiness, sometimes gives pain. And if the chocolate cake contained really happiness, it should give happiness to everybody. But some people they enjoy chocolate cake, some people don't enjoy chocolate cake. So that means that the chocolate cake on its own doesn't really contain happiness. The happiness is in the mind of the person who's eating the chocolate cake. And like that, it's all different objects. We're attached to different people, but some people are giving us happiness. They don't give happiness to other people. So the person itself is not the source of the happiness. It's just in the mind of the enjoyer of the object. So why this contemplation of the defects is so important? Because we have to reprogram our mind to recognize that, oh, I'm attached to it because I think that it contains happiness. But in reality, it's not the case. So this process of contemplation has to be there to start thin out the mind from that false notion of that it contains happiness. So then we contemplate the defects, and finally, at the end of the day, this we do in the morning, every morning. Finally, at the end of the day, we have what's called a Vairagya diary, spiritual diary in relation to cultivation of Vairagya, non-attachment. And what do we do in this spiritual diary is that at night we have to reflect how did the day went in relation to this object of attachment. So meaning, if we are choosing to develop non-attachment towards chocolate, at that time that we're developing the non-attachment towards chocolate, we have to refrain from eating chocolate. This is the tricky part. We cannot say, oh, I'm not attached to chocolate, and just gobble the chocolates one after the other. If we are really trying to develop the non-attachment, for that period, we have to be able to have that control where we're not engaging in eating the chocolate. Otherwise, it will not really work. There wouldn't be really the cultivation of the non-attachment. So that's why with food is a very good way to practice. So at night, we write down how did the day went. Meaning, first of all, did I fail? Did I eat chocolate? And then more importantly, we think, okay, so in the morning I'm practicing the thinking of the defects. But then when the day was going on and the desire for chocolate came into the mind, did I immediately was able to bring what we call the sword of discrimination? Was I able to remember when I was start thinking, oh, chocolate will be so nice now, I was able to remember, hey, chocolate doesn't really give me any real happiness, and if I fulfill this desire, I will just get more attached and more entangled, and actually I'm going to be more bound and more suffering. And in reality, chocolate doesn't really have any happiness. So was I able to immediately respond with this discrimination when the attachment was manifesting during the day? So like this, we reflect at night, how did the day go? Whenever the attachment rised, was I able to respond with proper discrimination? And what will happen is, after some time, if we're able to not engage with the eating chocolate, and if we keep reflecting, the attachment to the chocolate will go away. And then we, after 1 month of not eating chocolate, we celebrate with lots of chocolate. That's usually, that's the trick of the mind. It says, yes, Swami, you mastered, you should celebrate. Eat lots of chocolate now to celebrate your non-attachment to the chocolate. So that's what we have to be careful actually, because the mind does do that. But what is the most important thing behind this exercise and this training, that now this habit, this tendency of thinking in a certain way, in this discriminative way, where we start recognizing things in that light, where we start analyzing, oh, this is actually impermanent. This is actually not really contains happiness. That tendency of the mind is starting to be developed. And gradually, as we practice like this, we will start not just looking at chocolate like that, but any type of attachments that will come into the mind, we will start recognizing, hey, I don't really need that for my happiness. That actually doesn't really contain happiness. So that tendency of the mind to have more and more discrimination will manifest. And as a result of that, we become more and more free. We become more and more less dependent. We become more and more happy in all conditions, all circumstances. What this develops is the highest type of what we call spiritual self-esteem, where we start living in the sense where we know that our real spiritual value, and not have this tendency to believe that our well-being or that our value is coming from something external. And that is the real freedom. When we don't really need to, where we understand and we experience that our ultimate value is independent of the external circumstances. So this way we become free from the desire to making sure that things will be organized in a certain way externally. Because they will never really be. We cannot control the external reality. People will change, things will change, but that doesn't change who we are and our value. And we should remember our ultimate worth, even if the person likes us or doesn't like us. Even if we succeed in this or we failed in this. Even if this happened or that happened, we should always remember our ultimate value. And we don't need these external things to complete us. We are complete already as we are, by our own nature. So that is why Vairagya is so important. So we can start experiencing that directly. Okay, so these are the different steps of how we start training ourselves in the path of Vairagya. Okay. Hari Om Tat Sat.